Alright, y'all, so today I wanted to do a very quick video to give you my thoughts on Gamera 2 Attack of Legion. This is the sequel to the 1995 Gamera reboot, Guardian of the Galaxy. I already made a video giving you my thoughts on the first movie, so I wanted to give you my thoughts on the second movie, the sequel. From what I understand, the same director and most of the creative team was back for this one. Though a lot of the actors are brand new here, and there's not too many recurring characters. But what is my overall opinion of Gamera 2 Attack of Legion? I will say this, honestly, it's a pretty damn good kaiju movie. I really don't have a huge amount of complaints. It is an enjoyable movie to watch from beginning to end. Now, if I had to compare it to the first one, I will say that the first one is better. I think story-wise, it's just a better movie. The characters are just in general more interesting, and I think that it's set up and the structure of that movie is just a bit better. But like I said, there are pros and cons to everything, and I do think there are some things that this sequel does a little bit better than the first one, which I'll totally get into in my pros and cons. But yeah, overall, it's a solid sequel, but doesn't really surpass the original. All right. So let's get into my pros and get deeper into this. So first, for my pros, I generally like the new story here. I thought that the new monster here, the villain, so to speak, is a creature it's called a legion by others, which is a term that was used from the Bible. And there's a bit of strange Christian symbolism here, even though it's really subtle to a certain degree. It's very much in the background, but there's kind of a religious angle to this movie, but not a criticism. Like I said, kind of weird to see it in a Japanese movie, but hey, that's cool. That being said, I really like this new monster. At first he's like a bunch of monsters. That's the idea, right? He's a bunch of these creatures that come from outer space, from meteors. I thought that when they kind of talked about their biology, it was really quite strange. For example, radio waves, electromagnetic signals and stuff disrupt their communication between the creatures. So they attack a lot of radios, they attack a lot of cell towers and stuff like that. They attack a lot of radio equipment, and that's an interesting thing. They also mentioned that the creatures kind of move through, I believe, compressed air, because they kind of, earlier in the movie, one of the scientist people stabs, one of its legs, the smaller creatures, and, a bunch of compressed air shoots out. And I thought that was a little bit of an interesting little thing about these creatures. They're almost like gas-powered creatures. Even though I will say that their appearance and their design doesn't really show that, which that's probably my only criticism about them. Other than that, they're really cool looking. It's just from the surface, you tell me that they're compressed air and possibly a gas-powered kind of creature, but their biology doesn't quite look like that. They just look more like insects. But like I said, maybe that was the point, and, regardless, I like the little ones. And then when the big one comes up later in the movie, real unique and cool design. I love the little tentacles, not tentacles, but it's legs, its powers. I like the fact that it opens up its mouth to shoot a laser beam, an energy projectile, even when it uses electric red whips near the end of the fight with Gamera. Was really cool. It's actually one of my favorite kaiju designs I've ever seen in one of these movies. And I'm going to be honest with you, I think the creature design in general is better than the last movie. I thought that the Legion looked really cool. I get it, the Gyro was a creature apparently from Gamera's previous movies, and I liked him too. I thought he was a cool design. But the Legion, in my opinion, just looks like a way more interesting looking monster. And like I said, one of the few, big pros about this sequel over the original. I think the designs of the monsters are better here. I also thought how they're introduced and how the government reacts to them is pretty cool. It's well done. The movie in general is just well directed. We don't have too many reoccurring characters, but we do have The child who was from the previous movie, she's still here. She communicates with Gamera, even though I will say that she's more of a glorified cameo. Like, she doesn't really do much in this movie, which I was a bit surprised. We mostly follow some brand new scientist characters, of course, trying to figure out the situation. Also some military characters alongside, which I did like how the military here feels more adjustable to the situation, unlike the last movie. Even though here they're still unsure about Gamera, they're more adjustable, and I feel like they're more adaptable in their behaviors and stuff. And I thought it was really cool. And the new characters are fine, even though I do feel like the original movie, their characters they felt more like they had more personality, a little bit more to work on. These characters are fine. They work. I do like the nerdy scientist guy that kind of comes up here and there throughout the movie, but I don't think they were as interesting as the original cast that they got for the first movie. I also forgot to mention, too, another returning character was actually the police inspector guy from the first movie who was, like, super scared of the creatures and stuff, working with the scientist lady. He's back here more of as a cameo and shows up as a security guard, and he was, like, the first one that notices one of the Legion creatures. That was pretty cool. I like that little connection. But yeah, I mean, the characters aren't horrible. They're fine. They definitely serve their purpose. I do think the military is a little bit better in this movie, too. But I don't think it was quite as interesting as the first movie, but still very enjoyable, and I liked all of them. I did like the military characters as well. In terms of the action scenes are, like always, fantastic. I love the kaiju fight scenes. There's a good amount of them. I really enjoy them. I thought they were very well done. The special effects and the CGI. I mean, the CGI is kind of the same with the first movie. It's not amazing. You can definitely tell it's 90s CGI. There's like a weird looking shot where all the Legion creatures are kind of crawling over Gamera. And it's a really cool shot. Don't get me wrong. Doesn't quite hold up today, I would say. But, it holds up for what it is, and it's perfectly fine. But the action scenes in general are really good. They obviously use mostly practical effects, guys in suits, and it looks really good. There's some standout fights. I love when the big Legion monster fights Gamera for the first time. Really cool scene, especially with the added tension that this helicopter can't take off during the fight. Really cool part of the movie. I also like, of course, the final fight. Really cool stuff. I like the fact it's also set in darkness. It adds a little bit of a extra, I don't know, just extra visual appearance that really strikes a huge pro in my book. But yeah, the action scenes are really good. And like I said, most of the movie's plot is just the characters figuring out the Legion, trying to figure it out. We don't get necessarily any, like, true backstory, just like characters trying to figure out the anatomy and what it's trying to do. And like I said, I did think the creature's anatomy and the whole thing with it was really interesting. You just don't see a lot of movies explain their monsters like this, which was a huge pro of the last movie. Gamera here is pretty cool, even though he just kind of shows up midway through the movie. There's a pretty good section of the movie that Gamera doesn't show up in, which I was a bit surprised. They could have maybe incorporated Gamera a little bit more, but when he does show up, it's pretty awesome. And I don't know, they could have probably added some scenes to build him up a little bit more. But yeah, of course, like I said, I think it was a pretty damn good movie. There's just I'm going to go to some of my cons now. Like I said before, some of the characters here aren't quite as interesting as the first movie. And I think one thing that this movie's missing is that, while I do think the villain's interesting, the new story's interesting, I was a little bit disappointed they didn't go a little bit deeper into the backstory of Gamera, or kind of explored a little bit more with the girl's relationship to Gamera. I feel like that was a little bit missed opportunity because she's not really in this movie that much, and they don't really, like I said, the whole focus of the movie is on Legion. Gamera kind of takes a back seat, if you will, and like I said, I do like the fact that in the first movie there was like a healthy balance of intrigue between Gamera and the Gyro Bats. Here it's like I said, it mostly focused on the Legion. I do like how the military kind of changes their minds, helps Gamera at the end. But like I said, I do think that a little bit of a flaw is that they could have definitely focused more on Gamera. My suggestion maybe is to kind of go deeper into the backstory, learn more about how this ancient civilization maybe created Gamera. Like I said, it's kind of hinted there maybe some magical elements of it, but they could have maybe focused on that. Focus on the little girl and her relationship, and also kind of a general theme in the background. And like I said, there is a little bit of a general theme here. Like I mentioned, there's a little bit of a pro-Christianity vibe here. There's some characters like, for example, praying to Gamera, which at first there's like that kind of... I don't want to call Gamera's like first death in the movie. It's more if he just kind of succumbs and goes into a little bit of a coma to like restore himself. But characters are praying to him there. There's also that burning cross, like sort of part of the title at the beginning of the movie. There's a slight like overall theme you can look at, but not as prevalent or as interesting as the environmental message that was presented and clearly presented in the first movie. And I think, like I said, these little elements that the first movie had with its story, with the overall theme, a little bit more interesting characters, both sides of the coin, Gamera and the other monster, were getting a good amount of development and focus on them. Here it feels more one-sided, there's less of an overall theme, and the characters are just not as interesting. I think an overall kind of makes for a little bit of a weaker movie. Now, it's not a dramatically worse sequel. There's far worse sequels that are made. It's overall really enjoyable. There's some great action scenes, great character moments still. I think the designs are an improvement over the last movie. But I just think overall it's not as strong as the first Gamera movie. But I still highly recommend it. If you like the first Gamera, I'm sure you're going to really like this movie. I think it's mostly everywhere at the time I'm making this video. You can watch the first and second one on Tubi and like, really good high quality. There's also some on YouTube with like the English dub, but they have really lower, crappier quality. But it's, like I said, your preference, how you want to watch the movie. But yeah, this is the second film in the Gamera Heisei trilogy. Really solid, not as good as the first one, but still a lot of really enjoyable moments and a very good monster flick at the end of the day. Just like I said, some things definitely need to be fixed with the next one. But yeah, my thoughts on Gamera 2 Attack of Legion. Alright, y'all. Hope you have a good day, and peace, y'all.